Hello everyone, I'm Katherine Weare and I'm curator of this webinar series which have been brought together by the community of Contemplative Education for Mind and Life Europe. Now there are three separate series, all very connected but looking at slightly different aspects of contemplative education. The first one was on the core principles and theories behind this work. The second one was on implementation, what happens in practice. And this third one that you have just tuned into is about cutting edges and ways forward. Our speakers range across a wide range of issues. And in this talk, I'm going to particularly focus on an issue flagged up by Mikkel Bready of the Youth Mindfulness Programme, which is the need to take care and to avoid doing harm. And this is a theme that actually runs through all of the programmes that we explore in the community of contemplative education. We all need to be aware of the recent research that shows that mindfulness and contemplative practice is not without its risks. In my last talk, I will be looking at what might happen next with contemplative education, particularly around the need for social action and ethics. And we have several speakers on that issue, Orlaith O'Sullivan from the Wake Up Schools programme, Mikkel Kristiansen looking at sea learning, Rony Berger talking about what he is doing in Israel, in conflict situations, helping young people to address violence and intolerance and to work with one another with more understanding and empathy. And Karlheinz Valtl in Austria will be talking about the need to prepare teachers right from the outset for this new world that we're all facing. But the issue I'm going to look at today is this one about first do no harm. And it's an important area about which I'm asked a great deal when I talk. It's an area about which there's a lot of hot air and a lot of mythology and not always much good sense. So I'll try to bring together what we know from the evidence and what I've gleaned from my own practice in this area. Now, the context is that this work, of course, is generally speaking pretty beneficial. I spend a lot of my time reviewing the evidence, and I've talked about that on the first and second seminar series here, and outlined the benefits for well-being, for flourishing, for mental health, for physical health, for a sense of meaning, for teacher effectiveness, for young people's resilience, and so on. So the evidence is pretty good that this generally helps. But of course it's not inevitable. It's not always easy. We're taking people to some quite deep and difficult places sometimes. It's not for everyone all the time. And it can go wrong for people, sometimes in minor, mild ways that we may well expect, sometimes in more difficult ways that we also need to anticipate and deal with. A concern with this issue is coming very much from within the mindfulness community itself. Willoughby Britton, a neuroscientist at Brown University, is both a committed mindfulness teacher and also runs the Cheetah Centre for what she calls the victims of mindfulness practice. So this is not coming from outside of ourselves, it's ourselves who are quite rightly concerned about this issue and to explore it more deeply and to encourage more research and more safe practice around this. And I'm sure many of us, all of us, are aware that this whole area can get oversold. The book by Nicholas van Dam, Mind the Hype, the title says it all really, can be sold as a panacea for everybody at all times, cure-all. That's not a helpful way forward. And we all know, I think, that we need to temper our enthusiasm with caution and with humility. Now I'm going to talk next about some of the more everyday dangers of contemplative practice, the ones I meet all the time as a teacher of mindfulness and that are also reflected in the research literature, and then move on to perhaps the more serious concerns. So what are some of the things that we all tend to experience at some time and that I meet every week when I'm teaching mindfulness courses? Well, the most common one is to misunderstand this area as something which is all about feeling good, to chase the feeling good state, to push away the difficult, to see this as about bliss and calm, and to basically be quite unrealistic about what this practice is about. And it inevitably leads to disillusionment when people find that they can't clear their minds of all thoughts and live like this permanently, forever from tomorrow. Some people can see it as a panacea and abandon all their other ways of being, their other coping mechanisms, their friendships, their lifestyle, their exercise patterns. If they have illnesses or mental health problems, abandon their medication and just think this is going to do the job for them for all time. Very, very dangerous way to approach it. And not least because you may well lose all your friends that way if you become a mindfulness bore. We have to temper this with balance and to keep going at all the things that help us to live anyway. Some people very much overdo it. They see it as a self-improvement project and beat themselves up if they're not meditating 40 minutes a day and eating everything mindfully, and turn it from a practice that was supposed to be about kindness and curiosity into something really very harsh. So that's certainly an area that we need to watch in ourselves and to help other people to avoid. And it can, as many have pointed out, move into social problems, where people imagine that it's all about accepting everything, to sit with all our problems, and miss the point that the insights we gain from our practice are supposed to help us to act more wisely, less impulsively, but nevertheless to act. And that emotions like righteous indignation or sorrow or grief are there for a purpose, and we need to be with them and to take action around them. Not everything is solved by just sitting. There's also a tendency for us to see all of this as very much about each of us as individuals, making our own way with our own practice. And I will be saying more in my final talk about the need for mindfulness to help us to engage in social actions and to work together to change things, not just to accept them and to sit with them as individuals. Moving on now to the issues around harms to mental health. And there is a growing awareness that in a significant number of cases that contemplative practice can be harmful. Now, I did a literature review for this talk, and the estimates in the papers I looked in varied widely from 5% was the lowest I came across to, in some cases, 30-40% of increases in mental health problems, anxiety, fear, depression, trauma, flashbacks, dissociation. In one study, and I'll quote here, meditators reported fear, dread or terror during or shortly after meditating. That was 32% had that experience. So we clearly need to take care. So how do we address these questions of risks? I think we need to take care with all of it, even simple everyday practices like encouraging people to eat more mindfully or to walk more mindfully can have adverse effects. If we insist that everyone has to do them in a school, a colleague of mine, Richard Burnett, always calls this approach conscripts, we can put young people off this if it's not invitational, if they feel that they have no way out of this. And for those with mental health issues, even something such as mindful walking or mindful eating can be triggering. May trigger anxiety around eating for those with eating disorders or obsessive compulsive disorders. It can create all kinds of issues for people. It's not that we don't do it, but that we are aware and we look out for the vulnerable. And I'll say more on that in a moment. Now, as we get into higher intensity practice, short meditations where we invite people to close their eyes, for example, and to follow their breath. For some people, this can be quite alarming. People are not used to closing their eyes. Even a soft gaze and being with quietly may be triggering for people who have trauma. And certainly once we get into longer practices, such as a 40-minute body scan, may not be indicated for someone who suffered from sexual abuse. It may be deeply frightening. So the longer and more intense the practice is, the more we need to take care. And certainly when we advise people or we run ourselves silent retreats, we do need to make sure that we screen out the vulnerable and that we help and are available for those for whom this is quite triggering. I myself had quite an intense experience on the first 1 week silent retreat that I attended as a mindfulness trainee. May say something more about me than the practice, I fear, but that I came away from that with very strange mind states about grandiosity and being able to see the future and so on. And they were quite convincing at the time. I really needed to talk to fellow teachers who had said, oh yeah, that's that one. That's quite common. And I had to get back to normal, but it took several weeks of not moving into these strange and unhelpful and very off-putting for other people states from time to time. So how do we respond? Well, I've indicated already some of the need to be aware of the increasing risks as the practice gets more intense. We need to skill ourselves up to be aware of all of this, to know about trauma-informed teaching, and to make sure that the groups we teach are people that we are trained to teach. I myself am an educator, not a mental health professional, and I do teach people with mental health issues and problems. People coming on stress reduction courses often have mild levels of anxiety and depression. But if I know that we're working with people with known mental health problems, I will make very sure that I'm teamed with a mental health professional who will know how to deal with this in more detail. In the same way, I would hope a mental health professional going into a school might team themselves with a skilled school teacher. We need to know what our limits are. We need to take care to screen out the vulnerable, those who are currently undergoing mental health crises or who have trauma, whether it's school children or adults. At the meditation centre where I teach, we're very careful with our preliminary questionnaires and phone calls and so on to try to catch people who may have difficulties and possibly gently counsel them out, or at least make them aware of the need to take care and to work with us. We need to manage expectations, not sell this as a panacea, the road to eternal bliss. Make sure people realise it's about self-understanding, including being with the difficult, building up our skills and capacity to cope with the difficult as well as enhance the pleasant. And that on the road they will necessarily bump into a lot of difficult states. They will be helped to process them, but this is not going to be a bed of roses. We can put it in context for ourselves and for other people. Nothing in life is entirely beneficial or risk-free. There's a very nice paper by Willem Kuyken and Ruth Bear on the Oxford Mindfulness Centre website, in which they compare mindfulness practice to physical exercise and talk about the incidence of strains and muscle damage and broken bones that exercise can create, pointing out that we don't stop people exercising, but we do help take care. We know too that any therapeutic intervention can have risks. 5 to 10% of people get worse rather than better as a result of psychotherapy. We need to know our participants and our students really well to find out about them. If it's an adult course, to have an induction, to make sure that if we're new to this in a school, we find out who is in the class and work with teachers who really know who they are. And Mikkel Bready has some very powerful things to say about the need to go slowly and build relationships, often not through mindfulness practice, by playing games or talking or something of that sort, to just build a sense of trust and get a sense of who's in front of you. And when we're in front of people, helping them to practice, inviting them into a meditation, we need to take it slowly. build from a solid base of low intensity practice up to longer ones very slowly, watching out for people who may have difficulties. To keep the practice invitational, help people know they can stop at any time, give them safe anchors, the breath, the bottom on the chair, bearing in mind that safe anchors can be tricky. For people with breathing difficulties, the breath may not be a safe place, and we need to give people permission to just stop at any time and just to sit quietly. We need to keep our reflective inquiry invitational, not force people to talk, to have ground rules around confidentiality. Particularly with children and young people, make sure we don't invite them to do what Susa Kaiser Greenland memorably describes as expose their soft underbelly, possibly to less than compassionate peers, to make it safe for people. We need to know the pastoral and support systems of wherever we work, in a school, a university. We need to help adults who come on classes to make sure they report any difficulties to their GP. If someone just doesn't turn up, we phone them, we keep an eye on them. We generally know our limitations and the need for people to be passed on for support. And we really do need to ourselves encourage more and more research into this whole area. It's very under-researched, and we need to ensure that we are constantly matching our own skills and practice to the vulnerabilities and strengths, of course, too, of the people that we work with. Okay, so that's just to summarise. I think I'm saying that whatever we do, we inevitably sometimes won't get it right and will do harm. It's just part of life. But we need to do our very best to anticipate that, to engage in safe practice, and to be humble and concerned for the needs of those that we're working with. And I'd very much encourage you to listen to the lovely practical stories Mikkel Bready has to offer in his talk about working with young people. They're very real, they're very rich, they're very powerful. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I've also whetted your appetite for the rest of this fascinating series that's to come. Thank you.